Welcome, everybody, to this emergency interview. I'm Mike Adams of Brighteon.com. Today, we're joined by Dave Hodges of thecommonsenseshow.com. Dave Hodges, who lives in Arizona, has extraordinary contacts across Arizona. And Dave, I've been interviewing you for years. You have fantastic intel, and you and I have something really critical to share with our audience today. So thank you for joining me.
We do, and I'm glad you're giving us this forum to share what we both know. And by the way, I just spoke with Richard Mack, and we're going to add him into the equation too. It's pretty interesting.
All right, that's fantastic. Okay, so first for the audience, if you're wondering why you don't see me, it's because I'm only in my studio on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So when I record emergency interviews on like Monday, in this case, I don't have video. All right, so some people have asked, but that's why. But Dave, we've got your video coming in, everything loud and clear, so we shall proceed. Now, I posted some intel about Arizona. Arizona looks like it's going to be ground zero of the sabotage activation operations somewhere, probably, I mean, if Trump wins, which is, of course, always a question of how much they're going to rig it. But the sabotage operations are going to activate in Arizona. So Dave, tell us what you know about Arizona being ground zero for this massive assault on America and the sabotage ops.
Well, this goes back a year and a half when I had a dear friend, former FBI agent, tell me that with all the terrorists that have come into the country, we're going to see mass attacks. And they told me, because you're in Arizona, you're a border state, you need to be worried. This person did not think California would be involved because they're housing Chi-Com soldiers by the droves, and they're under the control of the establishment. They didn't think it happened in New Mexico for the same reason, so they said it's going to come down to you or Texas. And it looks like it's coming down to Arizona. So that goes back a year and a half ago. About 3 weeks ago, I did an interview with Sheriff Richard Mack, and I just spoke with him before we went on air. And he said, Dave, I'm getting a lot of indicators about an October surprise and massive terrorist attacks. And we just spoke on the phone, and he has some of the intel I have. I've also spoken to Paul Preston today. He has the intel I have, and he's also seen your post on X. And I'm trying to get a hold of Doug Thornton, ex-DHS supervisor. He's still really well connected. And so we're still piecing this together. But it looks like what you're telling me, I'm getting confirmed in what you put in your post, which looks to be very accurate. Drone attack centered on infrastructure, the use of IEDs, which I think is pretty much what you described to me in our preliminary phone conversation. But yes, the person I talked to said they're worried about IEDs in public entrances and so forth. And Mike, I want to call attention to this because it didn't get the attention it deserved. The FBI announced that they had arrested a man from Afghanistan. He'd been an interpreter and had been radicalized, and he was planning a terrorist attack on Election Day. And I looked at that, I said, there's no way one guy is going to carry that out. It's probably part of an organization that goes national. And I've even said that on the air. And I think this is preliminary to this event. I think they're not going to wait until the election, because I'm getting other intel that tells me that Kamala Harris's campaign, they're getting frustrated with her and they're quitting. Some of them are walking out. So her campaign's falling apart within.
Wow.
The people I know, Mike, that monitor elections, some are private, some are government, and then Martin Armstrong of Armstrong Economics, they're all saying the same thing. She has an approval rating that, if I were to average these together, is about 10%.
Wait, I've heard that from Martin Armstrong, but I think a lot of our audience might say that sounds unbelievable. How is it that the polls are so rigged if she only has about 10% real support?
Well, I can tell you about that. I mean, I used to teach graduate students, I did this for 4 years, how to do research for their dissertations. And sometimes they might want to do polling. So I taught polling strategy, and you have to build your demographic models that are identical to the population that you want to. You can't measure everybody. So you want a symbolic representation that's accurate among a lot of different levels, like income, likelihood to vote, race, occupation, that kind of thing. And I've taught that. I've looked at some of these polls. In the mainstream, they're the worst. And I've seen a listing of the top 25 polls, and none of the mainstream media is in the top 10, not one of them. And what they do is either they don't publish how they get their data, okay, and they just say margin of error plus or minus 3 points. Well, if you don't get any more than that, okay, that's like a research paper in college that doesn't have any references. So you have to discount it. And there's a lot, most of those polls are like that. When they do publish, I've looked at some of it, and they make just like, they wouldn't get out of my midterm exam in an intro to research class. They'll have maybe like 80% Democrat and 20% Republican, where the split might be more like 55-45 in terms of registered Republicans and Democrats. And I'm looking at that and go, you've already messed up right out of the chute. So the polls are largely designed to influence public opinion. And bringing my psychology background into this, what I believe they're trying to create is, we know about half the nation will make their mind up a week before the election. And so they're trying to create a groupthink mentality where, okay, be on the side that's winning, the positive vibes. The polls all say she's rising. Jump on this side. Trump bad, Kamala good. And here are the polls to show this. And that's, I think, the purpose of this polling. It's designed to influence the votes of the great undecided.
Okay, so, but as Martin Armstrong says, so the real support for Kamala is about 10%, which means that they're going to have to print and rig at a massive scale. In other words, even Joe Biden was more popular than Kamala in terms of organic votes, right?
Yeah.
So the rigging has got to be at insane levels, and I guess the question is, can they even pull that off? What do you think?
Well, technically, you'd have to do 40.1%, okay? Okay, in this model. But I think that's a little simplistic, and I'll tell you why. That great undecided I just mentioned, you might reach 25% of them doing this. So now her number would be showing at 35%, okay? And now you don't have to rig as much.
I see.
And that's one of the purposes of polling. And then also, too, when you cheat the election results and you have fabricated polls that show it's much closer than it really is, then the public doesn't really start thinking voter fraud. They think, well, the polls kind of were pretty close to predicting this.
I see. Okay. Now, if Trump does win, then we know that the invaders are going to be activated. And you and I have both spoken at great length about some of the targets that they are likely to go after, infrastructure. And you mentioned IEDs just now. Drones are going to play a big part in this. Let's talk about drones for a minute. What have you heard so far about two things? Drone delivery of weapons across the border, which can be, dropped by parachute or just dropped on the ground. And also then suicide drones used for the actual attacks when they occur.
The suicide drones, yes. Since you and I spoke, I talked to one person, and they didn't want me to mention their affiliation, but they would be in a position to have been briefed. And they said it was planes that dropped weaponry, and people are well aware of this. I mean, this couldn't happen in isolation. You're going to have satellites that pick it up. You're going to have radar that picks it up. It's air traffic. And it was traced to a defense contractor. And I've gotten two reports on that. One is a tweet, and as I speak, isn't it interesting? We don't get this out here very much anymore. F-35s are flying overhead, so that's the noise you're hearing.
Wow.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? How coincidental is that? But anyway, in terms of dropping these supplies, to me, those would be weapon caches. Those would be the IED materials, for example. And I wouldn't be surprised, just like in the Antifa riots when they found 3 weapons caches unrelated to Antifa across the country, if this wasn't part of stockpiling. And I totally agree with you. But I'll tell you, someone else said something to me, Mike, and they're a pretty good source. And I relied on them for election fraud material in Maricopa County, and they were right on the money. They told me that they're hearing mass casualty events, not just infrastructure attacks. Now, this is only one report, but they said, like, if you go to a movie theater or you were to go to a large a spectator event, say like an Arizona State University football game, where you could have 60,000 people there, they think there could be a mass attack in that situation.
Oh my.
And the thinking of this person, and I'm inclined to agree with this, I don't think they're going to wait till Election Day any longer. I think this is going to come before. That's
Really?
what my gut tells me.
So does this have anything to do with the claim that the intelligence community says there are going to be cyber attacks on or near Election Day, or is that something totally different?
I think they're prepping the public for, it's a desensitization that, it's not a conspiracy theory. Gee, we tried to warn you. We're the good guys. We're telling you about terrorists. And thing is the boss of these people, Biden and Harris, let them in.
Yeah.
But I mean, how many times has Christopher Wray gone to Congress and said, we have more red flag warnings about terrorist attacks than we did before 9/11?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just mention three people. I don't know if you follow them, but Matt Bracken on X, Michael Yon, who I interview frequently, and also Jeffrey Prather. All three of those guys are either former military, or Jeffrey Prather in his case, former DEI and DIA. DEA, these guys work through all kinds of agencies now. And Michael Yon, Special Forces. All three of these guys are saying the same thing. They're saying that the weapons caches have been pre-distributed all over the United States, that the invaders are already here. They're going to be texted GPS locations to go pick up weapons. And then they're going to be texted GPS locations of targets. And since they have IEDs, they have high explosives, they have anti-personnel mines, they have RPGs, they have mortars, and they have surface-to-air missiles. They can do a lot of damage with that. I mean, a lot of damage, especially in their numbers. I mean, America's never seen anything like this domestically. Never.
No, there's something else too. And we were going to go to J.D. Vance's appearance in Peoria, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix. I'm rethinking that now, because this is the kind of event they would hit. Paul Preston and I talked about this, and we both agree. This could happen tomorrow, the next day, because I said this before, and this is what I've learned from Intel. They will strike when they determine they probably can't win the election, no matter what they do.
I see.
So I don't think they're going to wait till Election Day, but they might. It might be post-election. I do know this, that Eric Holder is heading a group funded by $265 million of Act Blue money, and they're going to launch at least 100 lawsuits to stop a transition of power. Now, too, Mike, you have Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. Right. I don't know that all these things we're talking about are going to coincide and happen. Some of them could be contingency plans for a bigger plan. But I think that these are all in the offing. And I think we can conclude this, that they're going to take violent means to stop the transition of power. That's the goal. And then they have the ultimate power. And this is something, I was just on a station out of Florida where I said this. And I think the guy was going to faint behind the microphone. He didn't even know this. In December 2016, Obama and John Kerry illegally signed us into a treaty without Senate approval called the 𝐏𝐑𝐎𝐈 Principles. Then there was 15 nations. Now there's 28. And it's all like a NATO self-defense pact. An attack upon one is an attack upon all. And if you have a pandemic, if you have a natural disaster, if you have military incursion, if you have a civil war, we can send in the troops from as many as 28 nations. I think that's why the 𝐏𝐒-𝐈s are here. I expect them, in the aftermath of this, we're going to see martial law declared, and I believe we're going to see Chinese soldiers in blue helmets as an occupation force. And here's what scares me the most, Mike. I put credence in the Wei Fang leaked document speech to the CCP Central Planning Committee of 2017. John Moore has it. The late Paul Martin had it, and I had it. And it basically was a speech saying how great America is, and we admire them, and they've helped us in many ways, but we can't survive without their natural resources, and we're going to take over North America, and we're not going to cohabitate. And he was openly talking about extermination of Americans. And he said that there were race-specific bioweapons they developed in combination with Israel. And I don't think Israel is necessarily part of this, but this is what he said in his document. And he said the only thing that they have to decide is what to do with the 14 million Chinese that live here in America. Are they too Americanized, or they got to go too? And I think ultimately, Mike, this is where it's going to end up.
All right, so that's interesting, especially given some of the action that China has committed against Taiwan recently with practicing a naval blockade, air blockade, and so on. But you mentioned Israel. I do want to bring that in. It seems very convenient to try to blame Iran for something that happens domestically that gets the U.S. into a war with Iran, such as another assassination attempt on Trump, or maybe a bomb, maybe a dirty bomb, or even a small-scale nuclear weapon detonated in the U.S., blamed on Iran. Israel would benefit tremendously from this, just like they did after 9/11 with the U.S. going to war with Iran. But I don't think the U.S. can win a war with Iran at this point. I mean, all our munitions have been sent over to Ukraine, and they're gone, and our industrial output is hardly nothing, at this point. What do you think?
It would have to be nuclear. I agree, at least tactical nukes. It's funny you'd mention this. Your instincts are really, really good. When Doug Thornton started to do these anonymous broadcasts when he was still in DHS, he said that in his briefings, by the way, he just tried to call me, so I'll catch up with him. But what Doug told me was that they had meetings at DHS, and they thought there would never be another JFK-style assassination. Yet that's what we saw at Butler. But there were also, according to Doug Hagman's research, not one, but two car bombs that were pretty high-level explosives. And this is what Doug said. Doug said they didn't think, DHS, that a big-time assassination would happen like JFK, because all the cell phones and so forth would expose the real truth. So they thought it would take the form of what you're saying here, like a dirty bomb, a mass casualty event where your true target is just, coincidentally, the wrong place, the wrong time.
Right.
And when we go back to Butler, I am convinced, and Doug and I have done a show on this, Doug Hagman and I, that we really believe firmly that those car bombs were the real weapons going to be used, and for some reason they couldn't be activated. So they went ahead with a sloppily prepared JFK-style assassination as a backup. And I think you're right. The next thing they're going to do, because they failed twice with an assassin, the next thing that they're going to do is a mass casualty event.
Absolutely.
And they're going to blame Iran. I totally agree with you.
Okay, so let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit more. I completely agree with you. I have said consistently they're going to expand the area of effect weapons, like a van bomb, and then maybe like a dirty bomb and so on. But it's very clear to me that Israel wants Trump in power. Definitely Israel prefers Trump over Kamala, right?
Yes.
And Trump is going to give Israel apparently everything they want, to wage war and so on. But even then, my question to you is, this isn't 1991. The U.S. no longer has this military dominance over the Middle East. Iran has ballistic missiles. Yemen shut down the entire Red Sea. Hezbollah has advanced drones. And, this is a different picture now. And Israel's on the ground. Israel is getting its ass kicked. Now, it's, of course, doing a lot of aerial bombardment. But on the ground, it can't penetrate southern Lebanon. And it didn't even defeat Hamas in Gaza. So how is the West thinking it's going to wage war against, Lebanon and Iran at the same time?
It's a good question. I don't think that they can. And also, too, if we were to engage with Iran, say goodbye to the Philippines, Australia, and Taiwan, and Diego Garcia and Guam, those would be swallowed up immediately.
Oh, by China. By
China, exactly.
And what about Russia?
I believe Russia, I had some access to naval war games that were played, and it was a 9-pronged attack they originally talked about. Russia has a huge presence in the North Pole, and they come down through Canada. They also come in through Alaska and come on by way of British Columbia, and there were 7 other entry routes. But I think Russia would definitely go into Alaska. It's coveted for its minerals, and there's rare earth minerals for their military. So I would expect that to happen simultaneously. And then I would expect a Red Dawn style of invasion into the Southwest. And that's just on our side of the country. East Coast, the thinking is that New York City, Washington, and Philadelphia would get nuked. And there'd be ICBMs, and that they think that America would stand down at that point. That was the belief of the people in that Naval War College drill, that we would probably surrender with a weak president.
What? But we would surrender.
That was how the game ended up being played. They do these simulations all the time, but I was told that this was very, very popular. You know who might know about this? As you mentioned, Jerry Prather. I interviewed him a couple of times. He might be in a position to know this. Now, Doug Thornton didn't. I published my understanding of the drill on my website years ago. But I think we're going to see something like that. I think there's no question a Red Dawn invasion is coming.
Okay, what about Russia doing a demonstration nuke in the ocean or in the desert somewhere, saying we can nuke you anytime, anywhere, and then informing the U.S. that they have the Poseidon 100 megaton nuclear underwater drones already set off the continental shelf?
Well, they have them off our shelf, and they can initiate tsunamis.
Right, but I mean,
the continental shelf on the Atlantic seaboard.
Yep, exactly.
They already have those set up. So yeah, I think you've heard the same thing I've heard. I wouldn't do a demonstration. I mean, I suppose it's possible, Mike, but I wouldn't do it. To me, it's like pulling out your gun and firing off a round. If you're going to use the gun, you want to use the gun. Don't give the guy a chance to react.
Well, absolutely. But I'm wondering if the West, you notice how the State Department, they're all incompetent morons who have forgotten history, and they seem to have forgotten what war is. Russia has not forgotten what war is, right? I mean, how many people did they lose in World War II? And it was in their cities, Stalingrad and others. The U.S. has never dealt with that. There's no memory in the U.S. of war on the shores of the U.S. So maybe Russia's thinking that a reminder might work. I don't know.
Well, it could be, but I think there's even a bigger picture. There's a secondary overlay. You can take a 30,000 foot view. On September 22nd, this administration signed us into global governance on paper with the United Nations. Summit of the Future was the name of the event. 193 nations. And I think all but I forget one South American country. I think it might have been Peru, Argentina and El Salvador. They didn't sign it, but we did. And basically, I think there's 11 instances in there in the 148 points that I counted where we agreed to global governance. Now, if you want global governance, we have to remember the UN is run by nations in which 75% of these nations are tin-horn dictatorships, and their people have no rights, and there's abject poverty. And so that's their mentality. And who's in the way of global governance? Well, the only real constitutional republic in the world, the United States, 100+ million armed citizens, 7 million of those fighting age veterans. I mean, it's a hard nation to take down. That's why I believe the Chinese bioweapons speech from Wei Fang, I think they got to resort to that after they deal with this up front. Mike, I think that the U.S. is the target for the rest of the world to take us down. And I don't mean citizens of the world. I bet the citizens of the world are rooting for us, but I'm talking leadership of the world that come out of places like the Young Global Leaders Program and the World Health Organization. We're going to have the world rising up against America. That's what I think is going to happen.
Very interesting take on it. I think you're right. And I mean, the BRICS currency, which we'll talk about, is also going to cause a collapse of the dollar over time, or global de-dollarization. But first, I want to ask you about what we learned out of the storms that hit North Carolina and South Carolina, Tennessee, and so on. We learned that the American people are not prepared. And I'm not trying to blame the victims here, but most people did not have a water filter, Dave. Most people did not have food. Now, for some people, it all washed away. I understand. We sent $300,000 worth of supplies there. But for most people, they don't have any backup supplies whatsoever. How can that be?
Well, first of all, let's start with the elephant in the room. I laugh at the mainstream media and Biden and the rest of these officials who are saying, oh, weather weapons, that's a conspiracy theory. I'm sorry, but go back to 1997 and Nick Begich's book, Angels Don't Play This Harp, HAARP.
Yeah.
And they talked about the ability to control the weather. And Nick published all these patents. This is U.S. Patent Office. Then, and I've got a friend who was a signatory on Air Force Owning the Weather 2025. I had one of the first copies released on this, and I was allowed to release the parts that weren't classified. And they had all the patents for not just weather wars, but for earthquake stimulation.
Yeah.
And it was based off the early HARP technology that's really grown exponentially. So for people to say that they can't control the course of a storm, make the storm more intense, they have no idea what they're talking about, or they're lying. Those people in North Carolina, and this is really quite clear, okay, the people that were most affected, 25 counties, 23 are heavy Republican, so you've got the advantage of election interference. Number 2 goal was lithium. And it's interesting, the major mining company in the area, the name jumps out of my head, it starts with an A. Their major asset managers are BlackRock and Vanguard. And this company is in the lithium mining business. And if you wipe these towns out, like Chimney Rock and so forth, then you can start mining to your heart's content. And the biggest private investor into this company is the vice president's husband, Doug Emhoff. Yeah, Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff. So that's the number 2 reason. You start looking at this stuff and you say, okay, how many coincidences are we going to buy? North Carolina should not have been hit with that much fury without some artificial stimulation given the course of the hurricane. And then I'll give you another one, the one that followed up with Milton. It went parallel to the Gulf, okay, and picked up steam right before landfall, doubled in size, and picked up about 20 miles an hour of wind beyond what it was already doing. That's unheard of when you come to landfall. And the weathermen I've watched were scratching their heads. How could this happen? Boy, this is such a bad storm. Look at these anomalies. They weren't anomalies. They were artificial creations by the deep state. And it's interesting, the storm was supposed to smack dab hit Tampa, and it went south of Tampa. What's Tampa? The Democratic stronghold of Florida.
Yeah, and also the storm Helene, it spawned 20 plus tornadoes that touched down on the mountaintops in North Carolina, which has never been witnessed before.
They have never seen that before. And then we get the government interference. And I've talked to pilots and private organizations trying to send supplies. The supplies are commandeered. And there was actually a post on X, a lady who said, I was an 11-year veteran of the Coast Guard, and we're sending supplies out through our organization, not the Coast Guard, but private. And she said, we're trying to get around the spooks that are taking, FEMA and the feds and so forth. And she said, some of it gets through. And she goes, we put trackers on some of this stuff, and we've tracked the food to sanctuary cities. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, really? See, that's interesting. I was thinking of putting a tracker on myself. But our food, we were able to get it to, in one case, a ministry in Candler, North Carolina. The Pole Creek Baptist Church actually is where that went, but that's only because we had special forces teams on the ground ready to receive it, and they were watching for it. But you're right, FEMA is actively interfering. FEMA falsely claimed that militia were hunting them down so they could have FEMA evacuate and just abandon everybody. They're trying to cause mass death, and then they run around condemning a bunch of homes so that nobody can build back, so they can do the mining operation.
But that's a conspiracy theory. I mean, it's this boy. Whenever I ran something on Rumble about this, in fact, that ex-Coast Guard veteran, and I posted her post about the trackers, I put that up. And it's kind of funny. I never get any thumbs down. I mean, it's a rare event. And on these kinds of stories, all of a sudden the thumbs down people are showing up. And they put comments in there they're just insane. And so now they were tracking my work and trying to discredit it. They don't want the truth out. But the reality is that the globalists don't do anything with just a singular purpose. They like spin-off effects. And the
Right.
North Carolina situation is perfect. I mean, it hit right before registration for the election. October 11th was the deadline in North Carolina. How do you register, or how do you even vote if you don't have a courthouse to go to in a small town? There's no schools
exactly.
in a small. How do you vote? And so they're eliminating Republican vote in a battleground state with 16 electoral votes. And 23 of the 25 disaster declared counties are heavy GOP. That's not an accident, Mike.
Nope, not an accident at all. But let's go back to Arizona and what we think is likely to happen. Now, the reason I even brought up North Carolina is to establish that the average American person is completely unprepared for 3 days without food and water and electricity.
Yeah.
And as a result, I mean, Dave, you and I have been, advocating preparedness for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And how is it that people don't have a water filter? How is it that people don't have, at least 30 days of food? It doesn't even cost very much. So when this hits Arizona, grid down, right? Grid's going to go down. You're going to have whatever, maybe a water outage, because the water channels are very vulnerable across Arizona, especially southern Arizona, as you well know. They can be poisoned. The pump stations can be bombed. The canals can be bombed. All kinds of things can happen. How are the people of Arizona going to react to this, in your view?
Well, yeah, let me tell you how severe the problem is, particularly in the metropolitan areas in Maricopa County, which is the greater Phoenix area serving 5 million people, and also in Tucson, the second biggest area population-wise. We are serviced for our water largely by the CAP, and that's the Central Arizona Project. And it's a series of canals. See, we don't get to take a lot of water from the Colorado River because California has won the court battles to get most of that water. So we rely on the CAP. It's open. I'll tell you, the CIP is protected by chain link fences with a little lock.
Right.
And I'm telling you, if they're going to attack Arizona like we think they are, and they go after the water, they're going to dump massive amounts of poison. It's easily accessible, and people are going to die until we figure out what's going on. Then you're going to get the announcement, don't drink the water. And so, how much water do people have stored up? Where are you going to get your water in the desert?
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the reasons I left Arizona, was because I was trying to grow food. And you can't dig a well deep enough unless you're in very certain areas. Just, it's very limited how much water, obviously. You can't just walk around and find water in most parts of Arizona, where you can in, like Michigan or Mississippi or wherever, or even Texas for that matter, or at least East Texas, you can.
Well, you're going to find water, but you better have a water filter to purify. You'll find standing water in a lot of places, whether it's swimming pools or a lake or rain runoff. You'll find water, but you can't drink most of it unless you can filter it.
True. Okay, so given the lack of preparedness by the people, we also know that, for example, the police department of Tucson, which I used to be a board member of the Tucson Police Foundation, by the way, so I know those people. Hardcore leftists, okay?
I know.
Hardcore leftists. Same thing in Phoenix. Super leftists. They're not going to be prepared for this because they're just clueless, or they want it to happen, some of them. They hate America. So law enforcement's not going to help except the sheriffs. That's it. I mean, the people of Arizona are largely going to be on their own, in other words.
Well, what'll happen is that if you don't have food, you don't have water, there's no power, you're going to start ransacking your neighbors' homes if you can get away with it. And this is why I tell people you need food, water, guns, gold, because afterwards you're going to have something to spend as currency. Food, water, guns, gold, ammo, natural medicine, and tools. And if you don't have those things, you're going to be in deep trouble, and you better have a way to protect your property. The problem is you can't predict when the grid's going to go down. And although you may have an arrangement with family members to come stay with you to fortify the defenses, they may not be able to get there. And this is why it's important that you network with a few neighbors. I can't stress this enough. Even if you live in a rural area, I live rural residential, and I still feel exposed.
Yeah.
from this. So this is not going to end well. And the other thing is, too, is if we go back to the old continuity of government plans that came out of the Eisenhower administration, if an area is in total chaos, whether it's mass rioting or civil war, whatever it is, the plan of the government under continuity of government is not to come in and intervene and save people. It's to cordon it off, stop all the escape routes, lock people in like rats in a cage until the fire burns itself out. And then they move in to take over. And that's continuity of government. And that's what I think we'll probably see. So help ain't coming when this starts.
Well, exactly. And, the other problem in all of this is that all the National Guard units have had their weapons almost completely depleted. So even if the governors say, we're going to activate the National Guard and we're going to stop this invasion, they don't have any artillery rounds. It's all been sent to Ukraine and Israel. It's gone.
We have Katie Hobbs is our governor, too.
Yeah, your fake governor.
Yeah. But Mike, there's something here. Guy named Stenstrom, I think his name was. If I'm mispronouncing, I apologize. He wrote a 70-page dissertation on something called the Council. And it came out in July. And I've referenced it because basically he names names of who the deep state is, and he calls it the Council. And you mentioned like the State Department's a bunch of idiots. Yeah, but unfortunately, the head of the State Department is on the Council.
Yeah.
And just about every attorney general, including Merrick Garland, the solicitor generals, I mean, we have so many government officials, when you look at his list, that have sold out to a communist conversion. I mean, this is what we're going through. We've gone through a Bolshevik coup d'etat. The next step is consolidation of power. And this will be marked by these terrorist attacks. And consolidation of power also means, purges. And this is why communism is synonymous with body bags. And this is the stage we're about ready to enter into.
Well, right. I mean, the Bolshevik revolution of history, how many Christians did they kill? Tens of millions, I believe. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's what they plan to do in America. This is what the typical American person does not understand, that they're on the target list to be exterminated by their own government. They don't get it. I mean, and most people won't get it right until the very last day.
Most people will die before they understand it. I've tried to point out, why do we have transgender and why is gay sex at the forefront of everything now? We have gay prides and march. Who goes on a march about their sexuality? Stay in the bedroom and have fun. I've never understood that, except I do now. And what it is, it's called deculturalization. This is why they bring a lot of the immigrants here, not just to vote illegally, but to deculturize America. Customs, traditions, they don't know their rights, so you can't miss what you never knew you had. And so we are going through a Maoist cultural revolution. And the Maoist cultural revolution turns the society upside down, destroys the values, destroy the history, change the schools and what kids are taught. And then they turn around and overthrow the government. And that's the phase we're in right now. Elections mean nothing. And we're going through a real classic Mao Zedong cultural revolution in this country as well.
100%. 100%. Okay. If Trump wins and he wants to, let's say, resist this Marxist takeover, what weapons do the deep state have to do a rug pull out from under him or crash the banking system and blame it on Trump? Or what do you think they're going to do? Well,
here's something I know a little bit about. And I'm choosing my words carefully. If I identify positions, I compromise people I care about personally. So I got to be careful. But I'll tell you what I do know. Some base commanders, and this goes back a year ago, okay, but some base commanders are not going to go along with the status quo. There will be resistance. And I can tell you, I know this for a fact. And it's not just people close to me I've heard this from. I've also heard it from ancillary people that I have contacts with in the military and the intelligence agencies. They know that all the military is not going to side with this takeover when it goes critical mass. How much? That's the $64 million question. Will it be enough to defend America? But this is why Obama signed us into the 𝐏𝐑𝐎𝐍𝐈 principles, we could be facing 28 nations in their military. And they've even done drilling. When they had Jade Helm 2, they had an offshoot of it in Michigan, an isolated incident, Camp Grayling. They had troops that were foreign soldiers, UN, but they didn't wear blue helmets. They had a black triangle patch. And you see video, and I published this on my website, of them capturing American soldiers in a war game. And it was just a game, but you could see foreign troops subjugating American troops into being prisoners of war. And Jade Helm 2 was about some of what I'm talking about. In Texas, where you are, Jade Helm 2, they hired crisis actors. I published the ad for it. $18 an hour to play ex-military, disaffected ex-military that were now guerrilla chieftains. So the Obama administration planned for the pushback from some of the military they know that's going to come. But living in this country you remember how bad Bosnia was in 1992, where you couldn't walk out of your house and be safe?
Yeah.
I think we're going to see the same thing, but on a much grander scale.
Well, that brings up a lot of interesting points here. I mean, I'm not going to keep you too much longer here. I know you got to go, but what we see about war right now, even in the Middle East, is that occupying forces have a very difficult time holding and keeping ground. Russia has been doing it quite effectively in eastern Ukraine, but that seems, or what was eastern Ukraine, now Donbass, part of Russia, but that seems to be the exception. It's just because Ukraine has run out of men and ammo, right? But to take over portions of the United States, especially more mountainous regions, think about Idaho, think about the Ozarks, think about Colorado. I think it's going to be very, very difficult. There's going to be so much resistance among armed American people, but the country will be a war zone if that happens.
Well, they have to make it the extermination zone for just the reason you said. 7 million veterans of fighting age in this country is formidable, even if they're not organized. Okay, you're walking into a death trap if you're an occupation force. Let me tell you a real quick story. Back in the 90s, when I was dumb and naive to some of this stuff, we had the county health officials come to the campus that I was teaching on, and they wanted volunteers. They said, if you volunteer, your family will be the first to get vaccines for a chemical and biological attack. Okay, listen, Mike, I didn't know what I know now. And, yeah. Hey, sign me up. I'll be happy to do it. And then FEMA came in and took over the process. Okay, and we had collaboration with FEMA about the work we'd done, and we were integrating, and FEMA was going to manage. I got to be really good friends with this guy in FEMA, and he and I started socializing together and playing basketball. And so, as it turned out, he left FEMA in 2012, and I was coaching in college at that time, coaching basketball in college. He shows up after my practice in my office with his wife at 7 p.m. We talked till 1 a.m. He said, Dave, I'm bugging out. I couldn't tell you because people listen. And he says, I can't tell you where we're going. I've since kind of found out. And I'll just say this. He told me that every American's life is one day going to be in danger. Now, this is 12 years ago, more than just about 12 years to the day. And he said, prep, be isolated like you are. And he said, and make sure your neighbors, blah, blah, blah. He and other people in intel and government agencies were combining together to form their own self-protection community. And some of it they were building for years, and it was subterranean. So, Mike, my point for telling you this story is, and I asked him, when did you start doing this? He goes, about 2004. So The knowledge of this coming with people in the know goes back 20 years. This is not new.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, it certainly isn't new, but it's almost here. That's the thing. A lot of people have become desensitized to any kind of conversations like this, because the world hasn't ended yet. But on the day that it hits the fan, what we find out is people just aren't prepared at all. Like in North Carolina.
This is one time when I'm not going to take pride in saying I told you so, because it's going to happen.
No kidding. No kidding. All right, Dave, tell us about the Common Sense Show, your website, and some of your other projects.
Well, we got a lot of different things we do. Our podcast, we're really, really lucky. Listen Notes does 3.5 million ratings. We're in the top 1/2 of 1%. I know your ratings are kicking butt too, Mike. You're doing fantastic with Brighteon. And so they can always catch us on any of the podcast services. We're on 2 radio networks. But all of our work we centralize in the commonsenseshow.com. We have a newsletter that goes out every day, 8 p.m. Eastern, summarizing what we've done for the day. And so all you got to do is go to the commonsenseshow.com and sign up. The newsletters in the upper right-hand corner. And all we ask for is your email. We don't sell your data. We're not Facebook. We just want to help you become more educated and spread the word.
All right, fantastic. TheCommonSenseShow.com is the website. And Dave, thank you for your time today. And please keep me posted as this unfolds, because we're down to a matter of days now.
I agree with you. And I'm going to make the same request, because some of the info you provided to me today was a few of those things I had not heard. So, keep me in the loop too.
Yeah. One last thing. Remember that the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson was surveilled, I think it was a year and a half ago, by those large Chinese drones that were chased by, I think, a Tucson police helicopter. Massive drones, very high speed. It was written up in, I think, The Drive and a bunch of places. And then recently we found out that Norfolk, Virginia had the same drones surveilling for 17 days. The Pentagon didn't do anything about it. The Pentagon said, there's nothing we can do about it. So clearly our Pentagon is not defending America. Foreign national drones are going to strike America. It's very clear.
Well, Mike, you remember the history that they try to suppress, but it's true. A lot of the French leadership and generals basically rolled over and died with not defending the Maginot Line in World War II, and France got defeated very quickly.
Yeah.
And the French leadership sold out their own population in a deal they made with Hitler. This is exactly what the leadership of this country has done.
Yep. All right. That's right. Okay. Well, Dave, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
Keep me posted. I'll do the same.
Okay.
All right.
Care.
Don't hang up yet. Yep. Take care. All right, folks. Dave Hodges here, Brighteon.com for more interviews. Thank you for listening. I'm Mike Adams.